This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Today on the Saturday Breakfast Show, we are thinking about fast and slow thinking. We are thinking about whether or not we should be trusting our gut instincts, whether or not it's better to take some time to mull decisions and situations over, and how we can train our young people into deciding which method of thinking is best for them.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
A very good morning to you. It is Saturday, the 15th of March, 2025. I am your host, Darren Lester, and we are having breakfast together this morning while thinking about fast and slow thinking. I'm going to stumble over saying thinking about thinking quite a lot today, I think, but it's not going to be appropriate for me to talk about metacognition because that's not really what we're doing. So we're just going to have to put up with me stumbling, I think. But that is what we are talking about for the bulk of today. So if you have any thoughts on thinking about fast and slow thinking, then please do get in touch. If you are listening live via the Podbean app, you can just text in straight away to me. I will read your text out on air and we can engage that way. If you are listening live elsewhere, because we are available everywhere that you get your podcasts, then you can get in touch via social media. I am at Mr. D. Lester, that's MIDLESTER, on pretty much all of the short form. Do we still call it microblogging? I remember when it used to be called microblogging, but certainly the short form text format sites. There we go. And similarly, if you are listening on playback, if it is not 9 a.m. on Saturday the 15th of March 2025 for you, you can still get in touch with me via those short form textual social media services, because as I always say, the topics that I choose are things that I'm interested in, and so I will most likely always want to engage with you on these topics. How has everybody's week been? Mine ended up being weirdly busy. I was quite excited last weekend when I sat down and kind of sketched out my planner for the week to figure out what was going on, because it was rather empty. And then as the week progressed, it filled and it filled and it filled. And I'm now kind of looking at my work time tracker. And yeah, I ended up doing quite a lot in what was supposed to be a very quiet week. Not that I'm complaining about this, of course. You know, we welcome the work, we welcome the chances to make contributions to society, but yeah, it's always a bit jarring, isn't it, when you look at your week and you have in your head one thought of how it's going to go, and you kind of plan it out and you think, oh, you know, I can read this book, I can go and see this film, I can you know, whatever it might be. And then all of a sudden you don't do any of those things because the week fills up very, very rapidly. But again, we would rather that than not have anything to do at all. And, you know, it is good to keep busy. As you know, if you are a long-time friend of the show, since September, I have been working as a head of department in an online school, which means that I work predominantly from home these days. And it can be quite easy, I think, when you work from home to fall into bad habits, you know, because you don't have to necessarily get up and get dressed at the same time every day. If if your first class isn't until 10 a.m., then you don't need to get up at 6:30. if you're like me and you don't have kids to get ready for school and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, I think it can be quite easy to fall into bad habits when you work from home and you are kind of, for all intents and purposes, self-employed. Um, so it is nice to have the calendar fill up and not give you a purpose, because I don't think it's right for us to find our only purpose in our work. I think it's good to find purpose in your work, but I don't think it should be the only thing that you do that gives you purpose. But it is nice for the day to fill and for things to not be monotonous. Because that was one of the things that I found when I was teaching in a brick and mortar school. Everything, all the adverts telling you to get into teaching, they tell you that every day is different. But that actually isn't true. The days do become very, very routine. And while you don't necessarily know how each lesson is going to go, you know what lessons you have, you know which kids you've got coming, you know when you're going to give them a test. It is very, very routine. And that was something that I did struggle with, because I do struggle with routine. I like novelty. My brain, I think, needs novelty. And so, it is my current situation where I don't necessarily know if I'm going to have a class until people email me and they say, "Oh, Darren, can we have a class on whenever?" For me, that works really, really well. And I do like how varied my days are these days. But I think, having the things to do is also really positive. So it's about balance, isn't it? It's the same as with everything in life. It's all about balance. And I think that's going to be a big theme of the show today, because when we get to talking about fast and slow thinking in a little while, we'll see that both types of thinking have their place. Both are necessary to get by, and we don't need to pit them against each other particularly. At least that's the conclusion that I've come to.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Website covers comments by Ofsted Chief Inspector Sir Martin Oliver as he accused the most vocal critics of the proposed reforms to inspection. He said proposed report cards for schools are not and never were going to bring about the end of grading. In a speech to the Association of School and College Leaders annual conference in Liverpool, Sir Martin said giving parents and families the information they need in a clear and accessible way was a must-have. Head teachers in the audience at the conference laughed when Sir Martin said he did not want them to be doing anything for Ofsted. Last month, Ofsted launched a consultation on its plans to introduce a new report card system for grading schools in England. Under the proposal, schools could be graded across a variety of areas using a colour-coded 5-point scale. The scale would range from causing a concern to exemplary. Education unions have criticised the proposals for being even worse than the current system. Sir Martin said the report cards were never going to sacrifice much needed clarity for parents. He also said that anyone who thought that report cards were going to end assessment was mistaken, and they weren't paying close enough attention to what parents want, politicians promised, and what children deserve. Ofsted has faced increased criticism since the death of head teacher Ruth Perry. The government announced last year that headline Ofsted grades for overall effectiveness would be scrapped. In response, the president of ASCL, a serving head teacher, said the new report card system felt like a kick in the teeth. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson also told the conference that she knew the proposed changes were challenging and that they sparked debate, but that it was an important national conversation. She went on to say that Ofsted were putting out genuine consultations on the changes. Full details, comments and responses from the sector can be found online. The BBC News website features the issue of emotional literacy amongst men and boys. The charity Beyond Equality, which works with young men on tackling issues around violence against women and girls and the topic of masculinity, had been spoken about by them on BBC Radio London. Ben Hurst from the charity says he believes there is a real systemic issue across the UK, with how boys and men have been socialised to move through and experience the world. He said, they manifest in a range of different ways, and lots of ways are wildly inappropriate. He told the BBC Radio London team that the work of Beyond Equality was to have conversations with men and boys before violent or abusive situations arise, and to try and address gender equality through the lens of masculinity, with an approach that asks questions like, what is masculinity? How does that feel? Do we like it? And would we change it if we could? The BBC programme followed the sentencing of Hassan Sentamu, convicted of the murder of a 15-year-old girl in September 2023. Schools Week features an exclusive report on CEO pay and the rises which it says have sparked inflationary spirals in some of the biggest spending trusts. In its annual executive pay investigation, data has shown more than 60 trusts had leaders paid at least £200,000 last year, with 95% of them awarded rises. National Governance Association Deputy CEO Sam Henson said salary benchmarking is in some cases leading to inflationary spirals, and they don't come with an accompanying narrative on how this deals with the massive pressures the sector is under. The article goes on to say that the gap is widening between CEOs and the rest in the highest paying trusts. 19 of the 31 highest paid chief executives saw the gap grow. A full table of CEO pay can be found on the Schools Week website. Top of the table is Harris Federation, with their CEO being England's best paid and the first to cross the £500,000 threshold. Sharon O'Ryan of Payne Education said there was usually a strong positive linear correlation between CEO pay and pupil numbers, but this is predominantly in the early phases of trust growth. And that it flattens to a maximum salary for the job regardless of size. 22% of the highest earners are women, similar to last year's 23%. But a Confederation of Schools Trust Pay survey found women CEOs earn about £8,600 less than men, although the gap did narrow slightly. Full details of all the facts and figures, including some details of falling salaries, can be found on the Schools Week website. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Thank you, Joe. Really, really interesting roundup of the week's news, as always. I just want to pick up on the Ofsted thing before we get into today's show, because I think the way that the report cards announcements this week have been dealt with does kind of show the main problem that exists within our education system, and that is that schools are always treated as the ones who are in the wrong. I do feel that the way the interpretation of the report cards was belittled did feel a bit patronizing. And I think that given that schools are the ones being graded, schools should have some kind of say in how that happens. I feel like Ofsted kind of positioned it so that Ofsted and parents and children were against the school. And again, this is just my interpretation. This is just how I read it. And I'm not saying that this was the intention. And I'm not saying that this is how other people have interpreted the discussion, but this is how I felt. It felt like it was moving back into a them and us situation. And I don't feel like that's what it should be. I think that in order to give our young people the very best that they deserve, which is clearly what Ofsted wants, because, that's what they said. It's certainly what parents want, and it's absolutely what we as schools want. We should be working together. Instead of in opposition to each other. It shouldn't be Ofsted and parents and children against the schools. It should be Ofsted and parents and children and schools all working together to make sure that schools are functioning in the very best way possible, so that every single child in this country gets the very best education, gets access to the very best education that they can. And all of this constant pitting us against each other, in the same way that state schools are quite often pitted against independent schools, and in the same way that academy trusts are pitted against those that are still under the remit of the LEA. When, there is so much kind of us versus them mentality in the education system. And quite often it is just the run-of-the-mill schools that get pushed to the demonized side of the playground, if you like. And it just seems to me that this is the biggest place that we are going wrong. That all of the different types of education and all of the different systems that we have in place to provide, facilitate, ameliorate education are all working against each other, when in fact we've all got the same common goal. Hopefully we've all got the same common goal of providing a top quality, world leading education for our young people because they deserve it. And we should be working together to attempt to provide that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just naive in the way that the world works. I've spoken on the show before that kind of when I went into teaching, I was a little bit naive about the politics of teaching and about what goes on behind the scenes. And I wonder whether maybe I still have that when I think that we should all be working together for the good of the education system. I don't know. What do I know? I'm just a teacher. Let's talk about fast and slow thinking, because that's kind of what I've been getting to grips with this week. I was inspired by another conversation that I've had earlier this week. In fact, it might have been last weekend, about processing speed. Not related to any children that I currently teach, actually not related to children at all. It was a different educational conversation, kind of in the abstract. But it got me thinking, kind of like I said in my social media posts yesterday, it got me thinking about how many conversations I've had about processing speed over the years, because it is a big thing that we talk about in schools at the moment. You know, we know which of our students are our slow processors. We know what we should be putting in place to help them. We know what exam accommodations they get to make sure that they can access the exam and all that sort of thing. So, you know, lots and lots of conversations about slow processing. What I've never had a conversation about is slow thinking and fast thinking, and where the children kind of don't always know the difference between the two. And so that's kind of what inspired me to go into my shallow dive this week. Tim has texted in a very good morning to you. Tim has been very nice. He said that my naivety is not naivety, it's optimism and a belief that people achieve more working together than against each other. I would hope so. I really, really hope that that is the case, because that's why at Teachers Talk Radio we are here, is so that we as teachers and as people that work with and for young people, because again, I know that not everybody in the audience is a teacher, but we all work with and for young people in some capacity. You know, we all have that same, I hope we all have that same desire to do what's best for them, and we will be better working together. I don't know, maybe one day. Maybe one day. So yeah, I was thinking about fast and slow thinking, and yesterday my attention was raised to something that we're not going to talk about today, because it hadn't even occurred to me until yesterday. But I do want to kind of mention it so that you know I'm not going to talk about it. But Mr. Everett over on Blue Sky, Vince Everett, he is an MFL teacher. He is well known on the MFL circuit. He has lots of really interesting things to say, lots of good insights into the teaching of language. He told me that he was always a fast thinker, but that since having COVID over the summer, he's found that his fast thinking has become less reliable. We're going to kind of talk about reliability and validity of fast and slow thinking a bit later in the show. And he wasn't sure whether that was kind of a side effect of COVID or not. Now, I'm not going to touch on that, mostly because, like I said, it hadn't occurred to me. It wasn't in any of the literature that I'd read. Also, I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to talking about things like COVID. But I think it probably is worth noting that clearly there are people who are thinking that their fast thinking, their gut thinking, their immediate reactions, their I know that this is right, but I don't quite know why yet responses have slowed down since having COVID. And it might be that there are physical things. It might be that there are diseases, whatever, that do slow down, that do impair that fast thinking. Now, like I said, I'm not going to talk about that in any more detail because I've not had time to look into it. But it is probably something that's worth thinking about, because the stance that I'm taking through the show today is that pretty much everybody is capable of both fast and slow thinking. And all of the research that I've read this week basically boils down to it's about right time and right place, depending on which one you're going to use. But if we do start noticing that actually there are physical impairments to fast and slow thinking, that will be something in future that is worth considering. And it might be why we need to be having these conversations about thinking speeds, about fast and slow thinking, because it could be that if we find that there is a link between COVID, or let's be honest, any other disease, and thinking time, then that could be additional needs conversations that we start having in the future, in the same way that we start thinking about processing speeds. So, I always think that these topics are good for opening conversations, rather than being an end to a conversation, rather than being a foregone conclusion. As you know, if you've listened to the show, any of my shows before where I do these shallow dives, I never really come to a conclusion. Because I think, like much pedagogy, it's whatever is going to work best for you. But we try. We try our very best. So, fast and slow thinking is what we are talking about today. The concept of fast and slow thinking was inspired by a book written by Kahneman in 2011. So even though people have always talked about like gut reactions and, following your instincts and all of that, it was kind of in 2011 with this book, Thinking Fast and Slow is what the book is called, that it was kind of conceptualized as this idea of fast thinking and then slow thinking. And in the book, our thinking is split into these two, it's called systems. So you've got your fast thinking, which is system 1, and that's your intuitive, quick, automatic thinking. Then you've got your slow thinking, or system 2, which is your deliberate. You know that I like deliberate practice. We talk about being deliberate quite a lot on the show. It's your deliberate, your effortful, your rational thinking. And so Kahneman in the book kind of completely differentiates the two and says that they are two almost completely different types of thinking. And if you think about children that you've known, children that you've taught, maybe children that you were, you might be able to identify children that you would call the fast thinkers and the slow thinkers. So in terms of the fast thinkers, I'm thinking of the ones who always have their hands up straight away when you ask a question. They're the ones who might blurt out the answer and you have to tell them to put their hand up before they answer it. They're the ones who always have their hands up. And quite often, when we think about those children, we often classify them as our higher attainers. We often assume it's going to be the ones who have that deeper knowledge, that deeper understanding of the subject, who are going to put their hands up to answer first. But that's not necessarily the case. The fast thinkers are also the ones who have their hands up first, because they have that gut reaction and they don't necessarily have the knowledge to answer the question, or at least they're not aware that they have the knowledge to answer the question. They are answering the question and then hoping, assuming, thinking that all of the reasoning will fall into place afterwards. Then you compare that with your children who, when you cold call them, will have an answer, but don't put their hand up, or don't put their hand up straight away. They may be reluctant to put their hand up. The ones who need that little bit of extra time. And again, they might be the children that you think are trying to wriggle out of answering a question because, cold calling is raising its ugly head again. And we're being told that we need to cold call children because a lot of them will know the answer, but they don't put their hand up when they ask the question. So you need to cold call them to check that they do actually understand. I think, and I've spoken on the show before about how I dislike cold calling, and I think I finally now figured out why. Cold calling relies on fast thinking. Because you ask a question, you give a few seconds of thinking time, and then you cold call. It's still your fast thinkers who are going to get there first. Jenny, who is not putting her hand up as soon as you've asked the question, might not be trying to avoid answering it. She might not be not listening. She might just be in a slow thinking phase. She might just need the extra 30 seconds to process, to think about what's going on. So I actually think that cold calling discriminates against the slow thinking pupils. And I can finally articulate why I've always had an issue with it. That's the other thing that I like about doing my show, is that I can piece things together, two things that seem completely disparate, like cold calling and thinking speed. I would never have thought to put together before. But now I've realized why I have this issue. So we've all met children who have this preferred thinking style, if you like. But again, all of us have both of them. And we kind of slip between the two, depending on what situation we're in. Now, clearly it's not as black and white as I just said. For example, if you've got something routinized, then you are going to be able to answer a question about it via fast thinking, and it feels like a gut reaction, but it's not a gut reaction. It's just because the idea has become routine. For example, if I have taught in French the present tense well enough, and the children have internalized my rules, and it has become routine for them to conjugate the present tense, I should be able to say something like, okay, what is devoir in the third person singular present? And fast thinkers should, well, in fact, all of my children should be able to employ their fast thinking and say, oh, it's il, elle doit. And they should be able to do that because it's routinized. So that routinization, that familiarity with the concept, with the idea, it can facilitate fast thinking. Whereas if I've introduced a brand new concept, they might need to engage in slow thinking to help that routinization process. So again, it's not really as cut and dry as I have made it out to be, but this is why we need to be aware that all children engage in both. We're going to start with thinking about fast thinking, this intuitive, quick, automatic system of thinking. And quite often, fast thinking is emotional. So Jonathan Haidt, in his book The Righteous Mind, talked about how people tend to make moral decisions. They make up their mind about what is right and what is wrong very, very quickly through that fast thinking system based on a gut instinct, a gut feeling. He says that people will decide moral or will make moral decisions immediately and emotionally, and that in those instances, reasoning is, and I quite like this quote, merely the servant of the passions. So it's this idea that your thinking is what you want to say, what you want the answer to be, and then you rationalize it afterwards. I don't know whether I think that's a good thing or a bad thing. Should we be quick to jump to conclusions? Should we be quick to come to conclusions without examining the evidence? Well, psychologists say that that people need emotion in order to think clearly. So there is an argument that our gut reaction, our emotional thinking, is a way of forming clarity. Because you can kind of weed out the messy decision-making process, say, this is what I think, and then go back and look at the evidence to support it. A psychologist called Antonio Damasio discovered that people who have lost the ability to feel emotion based on brain trauma also lose their ability to make rational decisions. And so there is this link, ironically, because people will quite often try and paint them on, again, opposite sides of the playground. You are either a rational thinker or you're an emotional thinker. But actually they are intertwined, they need each other. However, we are aware of this idea of confirmation bias. This idea that you believe something and then you go back and you find the evidence that supports what you believe and you ignore the rest. And when we think about, in inverted commas, scientific thinking, when we think about higher order, confirmation bias is seen as wrong, because it means that you haven't examined, you haven't interrogated the problem from every angle. So as we move up the kind of order of thinking, and as we become more aware of our thinking, we start to kind of ignore the power of fast thinking and position slow thinking as the right one. But interestingly, isn't that in opposition to how we tend to see thinking in everyday life? People moan when it takes you ages to decide what you want to eat for dinner of an evening. When you are weighing up the pros and cons of different types of meals, of different restaurants you might want to go to, of different places you want to order in from. It takes you ages to find it, and people complain they would much rather you had a gut reaction. It seems overly intellectual when you're asked your opinion on an issue. It seems overly intellectual to weigh up the pros and cons. If you weigh up the pros and cons and then say, I still don't know, you are seen as being wishy-washy. You aren't seen as being a slow, deliberate thinker. So as with everything, there is this kind of gulf between what is preferable in academia, the slow thinking, what is preferable in the world, which is the fast thinking, and then, as always, schools fall somewhere in the middle, because schools are supposed to be academic institutions. But if you ask pretty much anybody what a school is for, they will say it's to prepare children for the world. And so you kind of end up thinking, well, actually, what am I doing? What is going on here? So yeah, we've got these two systems. We've got fast thinking, our fast, intuitive, automatic decision making. We have got our system 2, slow, deliberate, logical reasoning. And all of the research, all of the evidence suggests that system 2 is essential to avoid bias, but is not always necessarily superior. But that also means that system 1 is not superior because it has the potential for bias. Before we think about the kind of pros and cons of each thinking system, let's have a think about what thinking involves, what thinking entails. So the first thing that I looked at when tackling this project was the cognitive reflection test, the CRT. And this was developed by Frederick in 2005, and it measured the concept of reflection versus intuition. And it was composed of questions that had an intuitive but incorrect answer, kind of a common sense answer that was wrong, and a correct answer that required reflection. So it basically tested whether people were more likely to engage in system 1 fast thinking, the intuitive but wrong, in this case, answer, or system 2 thinking. And higher CRT scores, so the ones where you got the answer correct, but it needed that extra layer of thinking, that extra level of thinking, correlated with better performance in decision-making tasks. So Frederick's research suggests that system 2 thinking, slower thinking, is actually better at making decisions, So when I can't decide what's for dinner, don't come for me. I am just having a better decision-making process. That's all. I then went on to look at inferential rules. So inferential rules are learned statistical principles that aid in decision-making. So it's things like probability, probability matching, the conjunction rule, anything that you kind of internalize, that you make routine, and that you use to facilitate your problem solving or your decision making process. And having access to these rules, you might think, facilitates fast thinking, because like I just said, if something is routinized, if a theory is routinized, then you can call on it quicker, so you can make a decision quicker. And the research does show that having access to these inferential rules, the base rate probability, the conjunction theory, the probability matching, it does improve accuracy, but it improves your accuracy even better when it's paired with slower thinking. So it is better, you are more accurate when you have your internalized rules and you slow down, rather than having internalized rules and speeding up and going quickly. There's a lot of research into the role of incentives in thinking speed. Incentives tend to encourage better effort, but they don't guarantee better decisions. If you tell a child that they will get a house point for answering a question quickly, then they're going to answer the question quickly. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get the question right. It just means they're going to answer the question quickly. Similarly, if you tell a child that they're going to get a house point if they answer a question slowly, then they're going to answer the question slowly. Doesn't mean they're going to spend all of that extra time thinking or reflecting. It just means they're going to slow down. So when studies were done on adults and the adults were offered money as a reward, the study showed, quite common sensely, that the rewards increase the time spent on the problems, but they don't necessarily lead to the correct answer. Kieran has texted in, I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Good morning to you. Really, really happy to have you here this morning. I hope that you enjoy the show, and do keep letting us know what you think about thinking speed, because I'm always interested to know what other people think. I think that's how you learn, is by taking other people's ideas on board. So yeah, offering a reward to slow down is going to slow people down because people want the reward, but it's not necessarily going to lead to a correct answer. And again, this is one of those things that is quite interesting, because if you asked that question, fast thinking, I would have said that, does offering a child a reward to slow down mean that they are going to engage in slower thinking and get the right answer? I would have fast thought said no, because to me that's common sense. If I then slow down and unpick it, I would say, well, no, because they don't necessarily spend all of the time that I've allocated towards the thinking. They might just be daydreaming, staring off into space, making a shopping list in their head, and then still giving me their fast thought answer at the end of it without having put any extra thought into it, because I'm rewarding not getting the right answer, but the time that is taken. And how often in schools do we reward time taken? How often do we say, right, you've got 30 seconds to answer this question? because we're on a time crunch, we're on a deadline, we need to get through our lesson. Oh, excuse me. How often do we not chastise necessarily, but become obviously displeased when children are taking their time to think? Or the opposite. How often do we see a child put her hand up straight away when we've asked a question and we say, well, hold on, slow down. How do you know that you've got the right answer? Whether or not we mean to, or whether we realize it, we do quite often explicitly reward and sanction thinking speed. And again, this is why we need to be very, very deliberate in the classroom about everything that we do, because everything has an impact.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion, deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading!
All right, I'm going to give you a for instance, and this might not work as well as I think it's going to, because this is in fact a very famous case. This is a very famous experiment. If you are listening live and you're in the chat and you want to tell me what your answer is, then please do. You don't have to. You don't have to, but I will be interested to know what you think. I'm going to tell you about this lady called Linda. Linda is 31. She is single, she is outspoken, she is very clever. At university, she studied philosophy. When she was at university as a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice. She regularly participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Which of the following two statements is most likely? Linda is a bank teller, or Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. %80 of people, when asked that question, engaged in fast thinking and said that option 2 was the most likely. However, the probability of two events occurring in conjunction, two things being true at the same time, is always less likely or equally likely to the probability of one occurring alone. So it's actually more likely that Linda is just, in inverted commas, a bank teller than that she is a bank teller and actively engaged in the feminist movement. But your fast thinking brain, your gut reaction ignores that. It ignores the statistical probability, and it uses those contextual factors, the fact that she was concerned with issues of discrimination, that she was concerned with social justice, that she already participated in demonstrations, to kind of fill in the gaps. And this is exactly what happens in school with our fast thinkers and our slow thinkers. Our fast thinkers fill in the gaps. quite often with knowledge that they already have. Whether or not that knowledge is relevant is irrelevant to them, because you don't have time when you're formulating your gut reaction to go, oh, well, statistically, it's actually more likely that just one thing than two things. And I think that's a kind of cognitive bias, really, isn't it? That we use a lot of background information, whether or not it's relevant, to help inform our decisions. You know, at 31, if Linda graduated from university when she was 21, 10 years have passed. She may no longer care about issues of social justice. She might have a newborn baby and so doesn't have the time or the energy to be active in the feminist movement. At no point in the preamble was feminism mentioned. She might be a very traditional minded person. She might believe that the woman in the relationship should be bringing up the children and, you know, making dinner and taking on all the domestic tasks. Nothing in her preamble kind of precluded that. We just, and I say we because when I did this test for the first time, I assumed number two. I assumed that she was active in the feminist movement. So I'm kind of assuming that you all did too. But we kind of take this broad, her being concerned with discrimination and social justice, and we then apply it to the feminist movement. And we make that correlation, despite the fact that we've got no evidence that she was concerned about feminism whatsoever. She might have been concerned about racial discrimination. She might have been concerned about sexual orientation discrimination. So our fast thinking is absolutely controlled by the information that we have and the connections that we make and how quickly we make those connections. Because like Vince Everett said to me yesterday, it's all about coming to that conclusion and then knowing that the answers, the pieces of the puzzle will fall into place later. The answer is more important than the way you get there. But that doesn't always mean that our answer is correct. If you're interested in that experiment, it's literally called the Linda problem. And it's very easily Googleable if you wanted to do some more reading about that. I just thought it was a really interesting thing for us to think about. And it's called the representativeness heuristic, if you like the posh terminology. People match descriptions to stereotypes rather than considering probability. And this is something I think that people don't like to reconcile with themselves, because we all like to think that we don't conform to stereotypes. We all like to think that we are incredibly open-minded. But we are all influenced by what we see around us, what we hear around us, the media that we take in, everything that goes on, we process, and that all becomes an influence on us. So it is important for us to be aware of the fact that, yes, we can buy into stereotypes. Yes, we can be discriminatory. And we need to actively work against those things within ourselves. We also tend to ignore base rates when we think quickly. So this means that we ignore the statistics in favor of case-specific information. I'll give you, for instance, a medical test for a rare disease that has a 99% accuracy rate will still produce more false positives than true positives if the disease is rare. And in this case, people are going to focus on the diagnostic information rather than prior probabilities. So you might get tested for this very rare disease and you get a positive, and you're then really, really worried that you have this disease. But statistically, because it's very, very rare, you are actually more likely to have a false positive than to have the disease. So statistically, you should just go back and have the test done again. But let's be honest, very unlikely that any of us would do that. We would more likely just start trying to find treatment for the disease. So again, when we have our gut reactions, we do make these decisions. We do come to these conclusions on a case-by-case basis, rather than thinking of the bigger picture. And I think, when it involves something as personal and individual as your own health, that's understandable, quite honestly. There's then the problem of probability matching, which means that we have a tendency to match probabilities instead of maximizing the expected outcome. For example, if a light flashes red 70% of the time and blue 30% of the time, how often, if you are asked what colour is that light going to flash, how often are you going to pick red? Most people will pick red 70% of the time, because they know that 70% of the flashes are going to be red. But you are probably more likely to get it right if you pick red 100% of the time, because it is always going to be red at some point, and it's going to be red more often than it's going to be blue. That logically makes sense, but that knowledge that it's red 70% of the time overrides that logic, because humans are wired to spot patterns. We prefer pattern and we prefer variety over strategy. So we will pick pattern spotting and we will pick variety over a guarantee of being correct. And that's how our brains are wired. As people, we are wired to spot patterns. We've all seen the things online about, when people see faces in things, or when people see pictures in clouds, that's pattern spotting. And our brain is evolutionarily wired to do that because it helps us to avoid things that put us in danger. If we know that every time somebody in Ug's family, eats the purple berries, they die, we spot that pattern, we know to avoid eating the purple berries. So we are wired to prioritize patterns, and because that's instinctive, it happens very, very quickly. It happens before we realize we're doing it, and it leads to that fast thinking, even though it's not necessarily the optimal strategy. There's denominator neglect, and this is the failure to consider the full denominator when you compare probabilities. For example, if you had the choice between two lottery tickets, scratch cards maybe, one gives you a 10 out of 100 chance of winning, and one gives you a 1 in 10 chance of winning, which scratch card are you going to buy? I know which one I would go for. I would go for the 1 in 10. Because, to me, that seems more like a better chance of winning. But actually, they are exactly the same. A 10 in 100 chance of something is the same as a 1 in 10 chance of winning. So we tend not to focus on proportional reasoning when making a decision. We tend to focus on our numerators. Then there is our default bias, which is our tendency to stick to what we know. If you're going to ask me what I want to have for my tea this evening, I will probably say that I'd like a pizza as my gut reaction, because I know that I like pizza. I know that you can't go wrong with pizza. I know that there are a wide range of pizza options. It's an easy thing to choose. I haven't thought about it, and I might, when I sit down in front of my pizza, go, oh, actually, I'm in the mood for something spicy. I'm in the mood for some more protein. But I didn't think any of that through because I went with my gut reaction of, oh, I'll have a pizza. So we tend to go for what we always go for. Another way to interpret the default bias is that we have a tendency to stick with pre-selected options. An example of this is with organ donation. People are more likely to be organ donors when it's an opt-out system. So when you are automatically enrolled as an organ donor, you are more likely just to stay there than you are to opt out of being one. And you're more likely to stay there than you would have been to opt into being an organ donor. And this is because we prefer the status quo. And I think this is part of our pattern spotting. We often spot that the status quo is safe, and so we stay there. But it's also to do with cognitive ease. We like things that don't take a toll on us. We like things that are easy. And this can quite often fall to our students' disadvantage. Let's say that I've done a multiple choice test. And in my test, it was kind of randomly selected, but out of options A, B, and C, the first three answers are A. My students might spot a pattern. They've done A, A, A. They know they've only got the three options anyway. It's cognitively easier for them just to stick with A and to go with that pattern. So we've now got pattern spotting and default bias working together, informing that fast thinking. Then there's the covariation problem. This is the overemphasis on confirming evidence when you ignore the counterexamples. This is what I called earlier in the show confirmation bias. So you've got your student, your year 7, let's say, who desperately wants to bring his little stuffed rabbit into his exam. You say no, you're not allowed to bring your stuffed rabbit into the exam. And he complains about that because this little stuffed rabbit is his lucky charm, and he knows that whenever he brings it into a test, he passes. What he has forgotten is all of the times that he brought the rabbit into the test and didn't pass. Because he's associated his lucky charm, his little stuffed rabbit, with the passing, and then he just selectively ignores anything that goes against his idea that the rabbit is his lucky charm. So we've got this tendency to notice supportive cases more than contradictory ones, because for as much as we like things to be easy, we also like to be right. So we will ignore anything when we're making our gut reaction. We will ignore anything that kind of goes against that. So the literature throws up lots and lots of reasons why our gut reaction can often be at least neutral, if not outright misleading and incorrect.
Meet 2025 BET Award winner Kialo EDU, the 100% free tool for thoughtful, inclusive classroom discussion. On Kialo, students contribute instantly and simultaneously to create an interactive map of a discussion. deepening their subject knowledge and enhancing their critical thinking skills. Set tasks, track participation, and provide personalized feedback in just a few clicks. And since it's compatible with all your favorite LMS platforms, it slots seamlessly into your existing workflow. Over 1 million educators and students are already using Kialo to make the world a more thoughtful place. Join them today at kialo-edu.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out! Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading!
All right, so we're going to close with a study today. I looked over a study by Lawson, Larrick and Soul, published in 2020, which specifically compared fast and slow thinking. And they wanted to investigate whether slow thinking improves decision-making by reducing those biases that we just discussed. So all of those biases that we thought about all come out during our fast thinking, during our gut reaction. Because, our fast thinking isn't psychically correct. It's not magically the right answer. It's informed by a lot of things that we've processed that we don't realize necessarily that we have processed. And the findings of this study were actually really interesting. First of all, they found that the higher CRT rate made for better performance in problem solving. They found that better skills in numeracy also predicted improvement in decision making, and that rule accessibility significantly influenced accuracy. So having the time to sit and think logically, if you like, about the questions that they were asked did result in more accuracy in coming to their answers. And again, this might sound like common sense. Obviously, if you've got more time to think about it, you are going to come up with the correct answer. But like I said before, how often do we laud fast thinking? How often do we praise quick thinking? How often do we expect snap decision making? How often do we praise CEOs and tech conglomerates because they are decisive thinkers? And how often does that mean that they go with their guts and kind of ignore other evidence? And again, this is a kind of, I guess, a fast thinking bias, isn't it? That when you fast think about something, you say, yes, slowing down is going to have a higher success rate. But actually, when you do slow down and think about it, that's not what the rest of the world says. Slow thinking led to higher accuracy when they broke it down into percentages. So 61.6% of questions answered at a slower pace were answered accurately, compared to 52.2% of questions answered at a faster pace. That's quite significant, isn't it? That's almost 10%. Fast thinking resulted in worse performance versus a control study. And participants in this study improved their accuracy when they were given time to reflect. So when they were told, no, that answer is wrong, and then given time to slow down and think about their answer, they improved their accuracy. People with access to the inferential rules that we talked about before, they perform significantly better than those who did not have access to them, which suggests that accuracy is boosted by rule knowledge interacting with cognitive reflection. So knowing the rules and having time to think about it boosts the accuracy. But they did find that not all of the errors made came from intuition. Some came from a direct lack of knowledge. So we can't suggest that fast thinkers are always getting, or the mistakes that fast thinkers are making are mistakes because they are thinking too quickly. Could be mistakes because they genuinely don't know. And again, we can't assume that accuracy is going to be better with slower thinkers just because they've slowed down, because they might still not know. So this is why we don't have like 100% accuracy rates. They found that incentives had a very small effect on accuracy. Effort alone does not guarantee better reasoning without the inferential rules, and that these monetary rewards that they were offering encouraged more time spent on decisions, but they did not always lead to better answers. So rewarding time spent, either saying I'm going to give a house point to whoever gets this first, or I'm going to give house points to people who show me that they have slowed down and have thought about it, is not going to lead to a better answer. It's just going to lead to your young people working the system, gaming the system so that they can get the house point. All this to say, the study suggests that we need to encourage slow thinking because that does improve decision making. But the writers of the study suggest that it's only a modest improvement. Now, I think that almost 10% is decent, but I suppose you have to think a lot about how your young people are defining themselves. Is being the first to answer an integral part of John's identity? Does he define himself as the person who always answers first, the person who always answers the quickest? This is particularly true of young children. I'm thinking of Key Stage 2 children, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, between the ages of 8 and 11. Quite often they like to be first. They want to be the fastest. And if you then say, actually, no, it's bad to be the fastest, it's bad to be first, you are undermining how they feel about themselves. So we've got to think about whether it's worth that undermining of identity in order to encourage the slower thinking. In order to make these good decisions, be they snap decisions or considered decisions, they need access to the relevant inferential rules. They need the knowledge in order to make the decision. Incentives alone are not sufficient to reduce bias. You can't pay somebody enough money to get them to ignore their confirmation bias, to get them to ignore what they already perceive as being correct, unless they're going to do it just to earn the money. And fast thinking is not as qualitatively strong, sound as slow thinking, but intuition can be correct. So, like I said at the top of the show, there isn't really a conclusion here. It feels like we need to encourage the slow thinking, particularly where the children know the rules and can apply them. So again, if I take my idea of conjugating verbs, because I think that's always a good example to use here, because for a large part, they are rule-based. When we start learning to conjugate the verbs, if you've got your verb chart in front of you, and I give you your infinitive and you know step by step how to do it, then slowly you're going to be able to work it out, and that's better than if you have a gut reaction and you get it wrong because you haven't routinized that process yet. However, once that process is routinized and you can do it without having to think through the steps anymore, and it becomes fast thinking, you will get it right. So it's all about whatever processes, whatever cognitive processes are working within your system. The scientists behind the study have suggested that we need more research into how to improve rule accessibility. We need more studies into rule training, and we need a bigger focus on how this can be applied practically within education. Because now we have this theoretical knowledge. Now we know that in theory, it's better to work slower. It's better to not trust your gut, but be able to justify your thinking. It's better not to be able to just say, oh, I know the answer. But how do we do that in the classroom when we are pushed for time, when exams are under time constraints? There need to be lots of practical considerations here, because we know that slowing down is better, but that's not necessarily what our education system promotes. So there we go. That is the conclusion that I have come to for this week. Don't worry if your gut instinct, if your fast thinking times have slowed down as a result of COVID, for example, or as a result of aging, or whatever it might be. It's actually better to take your time and think about your answer to a question anyway. So it's always going to be good. It's always going to be good. Thank you very much for listening. I hope, as always, that this week has given you something to think about, something to apply in your own lives. My challenge for you, my call to action for you this week is to try out the Linda problem on a few people, just out of interest, and see what they say. See if they come to the same conclusion that you did. See if they come to the same conclusion that I and 80% of other respondents came to, that Linda would be a feminist as well as a bank teller. And if you want to, sort of let me know how you get on. Once again, I am on the social media. Oh, that made me sound old, didn't it? I'm all over the Facebooks. I'm on both Twitter and Blue Sky, X and Blue Sky, at Mr. D. Lester. That's MRDLESTER. So yeah, please do let me know if you do try out the Linda problem on anybody and see how they get on. This is usually the point where I would say that I'm going to see you next week, but I'm actually going to see you on Tuesday, hopefully. So on Tuesday evening, 6 p.m. British time, I am hosting a one-off special, as it were. We won't be having breakfast together. I suppose we will be having tea together, because I'm in Gloucestershire and for us it's tea, but maybe for some of you it will be dinner. We will be eating together along with some guests. I know it's a kind of rare occasion where I have some people on board. I am going to be joined by Julian Metcalf, who is a head teacher at Dartford Grammar School. I'm going to be joined by Matt Schofield, who is the Mandarin Excellence Programme Manager at UCL's Faculty of Education and Society. And I'm going to be joined by Beth Fleming, who is a Mandarin Excellence Programme Chinese teacher at the Macmillan Academy. And we are going to be talking about what can be learned from the Chinese Excellence Programme the Mandarin Excellence Programme, the MEP, when it comes down to success in language teaching and learning. And, we know that this is something that I'm really interested in. My doctorate, in fact, is all focusing itself around success in language teaching and learning. And so I'm really excited to talk to some other linguists about their experiences and about how the Mandarin Excellence Programme has helped them. It will also be really nice for me. It'll be a bit of a novelty to have somebody else on the show, because usually it is just me. And so I do hope that you will join in live. Or, excuse me, hope that this frog in my throat goes away by then. I hope that you will join me live on Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. British time for that one, because I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion about not just the role of Mandarin and languages in general in the UK curriculum, but also about the different things that the Mandarin Excellence Programme promotes, the different ways that it gets people engaged with their language learning, the impact that has on the results and retention within these schools that have successfully implemented that. And then sort of you can think about, if you are a Chinese teacher, you can think about how you can implement the MEP within your own practice. But if you're not a Chinese teacher, if you teach another language, you can maybe take a few of the ideas that we're going to talk about on Tuesday and think about how you can apply them into your own language teaching. So that is live on Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. We are going to be on YouTube, I believe, and other platforms. And keep an eye out on my social media and the general TTR social media, because we will make sure that you know exactly how to get to where we will be. If you can't join me live on Tuesday evening, I do hope that you will think about listening to it on playback. Playback listens help out not just me as your favorite TTR presenter, clearly, but also TTR as a whole, because it adds to our downloads, it adds to getting our shows pushed out into the algorithm, so that other teachers can find us and can have access to everything that we talk about. And as does leaving comments and reviews. So if anything that I've talked about here on the show this morning, or anything that we discuss on Tuesday, is of interest to you and you enjoy the show, please do leave us a comment, leave us a review, because that is always useful. If you can't join us live on Tuesday and you are then thinking of listening on playback, that is absolutely fine. I will look forward to seeing you next Saturday at 9 a.m, as I always do. Just because I'm having a show on Tuesday doesn't mean that I'm going to abandon you. This is like an extra opportunity, certainly for me, rather than a replacement. So I will see you next Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Please do stay tuned, because Famida is coming up at 1 p.m, and that will be a very interesting show indeed. In case I don't speak to you on Tuesday or in the week between, have yourself a great week, and I will see you next Saturday. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.